Welcome everyone to Enterprise.expert. Today's episode is QuickBooks Enterprise Users, Roles, and Permissions. This is the monthly webinar for May 2017, and today is May 17th, 12 p.m. Eastern. Today's content will spend about 5 minutes talking about what Enterprise Expert webinars are, and we'll spend about 45 to 50 minutes on user roles and permissions, and then the last 5 minutes we'll spend on Q&A. This will take roughly about 1 hour. Who is Enterprise.expert? We're a community of experts in the enterprise level technology area. We congregate anyway in a Facebook group, so you can check out our Facebook group where we have discussions about QuickBooks Enterprise and other enterprise level technologies. We have our website or blog is enterprise.expert, no www, no.com, and our monthly webinar series, which most of you are attending live unless you're watching this in a recorded video afterwards. What does Enterprise.expert mean? So the vision is enterprise is a medium-sized business that it has a proven concept that relies heavily on technology to run its operations. Now, by technology, we're talking about software, hardware, database systems, ERP, CRM, whatever makes that business run. And by expert, we're just anyone that's in the community that's willing to share their technology or their experience or their knowledge or anything they learned using these type of technologies. It's welcome to join us in our Facebook group, email me, or even can come and co-present with me. Now, about the webinar series, it's every third Wednesday of each month at 12 p.m. Eastern. We may have special episodes on different days that have sponsored or collaborated content. We're not a CPE or an ACE provider, and we are focusing on QuickBooks Enterprise for the first 10 to 12 episodes. This has been going on for about a year or so until we kind of exhaust all of the QuickBooks Enterprise topics, and then we're going to start moving into other even competitors of QuickBooks or third-party apps that talk to QuickBooks. About myself, my name is Hector Garcia. I'm the CEO of Active CPA, a accounting and integrated consulting firm based out of Miami, and we have a partner in Los Angeles, California. And I'm an advanced QuickBooks Pro advisor and an Intuit Premier reseller. My email is in the screen, hector@garciacpa.com. If you need to contact me or ask questions, I'm actually pretty good at answering those type of questions. Okay, so let's dig right into the topic. We're going to talk about single user versus multi-user, and we'll discuss some of the limitations around working with multi-user mode. We're going to be talking about what's called the user list. Then we're going to talk about the roles, and then we're going to talk about the module to view and preview permissions. So those are the 4 topics that we're going to discuss today. So let's talk about some facts and tips around working with multi-user with QuickBooks Enterprise. First of all, QuickBooks Enterprise comes in 11 different flavors in terms of users. You can get a 1-user version of QuickBooks Enterprise, and you can go one up all the way up to 10. So you can get a 6-user, a 9-user, a 10-user. You can pick whatever you want from 1 to 10, or if you need more than 10, you have to move to a 30-user edition. There's nothing between 10 and 30 user as of the day of this webinar, as of May 2017. Those are the different options that you have in terms of purchasing users in QuickBooks Enterprise. Now, you can have more than, let's say, 30 users that are not in use, right? So you don't have to delete the users that are already there. As a matter of fact, we recommend not to delete the users. So if you have an employee that left and somebody else is replacing that person, don't delete the old user, leave it there. You can change the name, add old or deleted or inactive next to it if you want to. So people are not using it, but don't delete the users. It's really, really important. It tends to corrupt your data and it messes up your audit trail reports. Now, it's also very important that you disable the QuickBooks specific firewalls when you're working on multi-user mode. The number one reason why people have issues working in multi-user, and in some cases heavy speed issues, is because they don't disable the specific firewall ports that Intuit recommends you to do. So I'm going to show you how to kind of find out what those are. Let me escape out of this for a second. Okay, and I'm gonna go into Google and just show you a simple Google search. I'm gonna put QuickBooks. I'm just gonna search QuickBooks Firewall. Okay, so I search for QuickBooks Firewall, and it should be any of the non-sponsored hits that are there. So if I click on that, it should take me to a QuickBooks page. Well, not that one. Let's try maybe the second one here. It should take me to a page that actually tells me what the firewalls are. So if you actually go in it and select your right operating system, Windows 10, Windows 8, whatever, it would actually tell you the steps that you got to take to open up those firewalls. Now, this is really, really important. Whenever you're working with more than one user, you have to make sure that every one of the computers either completely has their firewalls turned off, which I'm pretty sure that's not something you want to do because it's a security problem. But at least if you have to have the firewall on, you have to go into and follow these instructions and specifically tell Windows that these firewalls need to be open. Now, the difference in speed and reliability whenever working on multi-user is really, really big. So it's really, really important that you do that. And if you're not an IT person, I apologize that maybe that's not the type of stuff that you're doing all the time, but it's really, really important that you take a look at those firewall issues. Now, going back to QuickBooks multi-user mode, there can only be one admin. The admin is the one that can do pretty much everything, change users, create users, change user permissions. Only the admin can do that. Now, there's one permission structure called external accountant, which is the closest to the admin. It can do almost everything the admin can do except for changing company preferences. So that's just really important to keep in mind. Now, when you move from QuickBooks Pro to QuickBooks Enterprise, there is a nice advantage in terms of stuff that you can do in multi-user mode. So when you're working with QuickBooks Pro or QuickBooks Premier, you cannot do adjustments, inventory adjustments while in multi-user. You cannot delete list items. You cannot change sales tax rates. You cannot define custom fields. You can't not even close the books when you're in multi-user mode in Pro and Premier. You can't, not more than one person can make deposits, and you can't change the order of any list items. So by upgrading to Enterprise from QuickBooks Pro Premier to Enterprise, you get a couple of additional tasks that you can do in multi-user mode. However, even with QuickBooks Enterprise, there's a limitation on certain things that can not be done via multi-user mode. So keep that in mind, that it doesn't completely solve the problem, but at least it gives you a little bit more flexibility once you move to QuickBooks Enterprise. Okay, some other important topics to discuss here are, are that you cannot change or edit any company preferences while on multi-user mode, with the exception of closing the period. Closing the period is the only company preference that you can do while in multi-user mode. So I will show you that, by the way. And as I mentioned, there are other activities that cannot be performed while in multi-user mode, like, for example, merging list items. That cannot be done in multi-user mode, no matter whether you have Enterprise or not. So there's a couple of things that you just cannot do. And another really important thing to keep in mind is that the admin user can kick users out of QuickBooks. So I'll discuss that as well. So let me go into the product here and show you. So I am currently on multi-user mode, and the way you know is by, in the top portion of the title bar, it would say multi-user, and then next to it, it will tell you which is the user that is logged in. So if I go to the edit preferences, while I'm in multi-user, I can change any of my preferences. So any of the preferences that are under the My Preferences tab can be changed by any user. However, company preferences cannot be changed while you're in multi-user mode. So it tells you right there and then that most of the company preferences requires for you to be in single user mode. The only one that will still allow me to do is the closing date. So for example, I can do a closing date even in multi-user mode. So that's actually a really cool thing. Okay, so I can do it with or without a password, whatever it happens to be. Okay, and the other user that can do that is the external accountant. So there's a user called external accountant, which we'll discuss in a second, which can also change company preferences while in multi-user mode specifically on closing date. I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. So let's talk about now setting up users. So I'm gonna go to the company menu, click on users, and set up users and roles. So right now I only have one user set up, which is the admin. Okay, the admin, it has a role assigned to it called admin. You cannot assign the admin role to anyone else. You can assign the admin role to anyone else, but that does not make them the admin user. So the admin has full access to everything with the exception of making changes to company settings, which that will require you to be the actual admin. So for example, if I go and create a new user, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new, and then I'm going to create a user called Hector, and then I'm going to set up a password for Hector, and then I'm going to notice that if I scroll up and down, I cannot give him the admin role. Now I can give him full access, which is the closest thing to admin, so I can give Hector full access, which pretty much can do everything. The only exception is that Hector cannot change company settings, okay? Because that's only something that the admin user can do. So let me go ahead and hit OK, and then I'll hit close, and then I'm gonna log out. So file, close company, and then I'm gonna log in as the user I just created. Okay, now because this is a webinar and I only have one computer, you're gonna see me coming in, logging in and out of the file instead of working with two computers in multi-user mode, but this is to simulate an entirely different user logging into QuickBooks. So this user here has full access, which means I can do anything I want, with the exception of changing company preferences. Notice that when I try to change company preferences, it would give me the same error, and even if I was on single user mode. So right now that I have permission to everything, I can do anything I want. So for example, I'm gonna go to enter bill, and I'm gonna create a bill just to show you real quick. I'm gonna create a bill for $1,000, and I'll select whatever category there, and I'll click on save. Okay, I had full access, I could do that. Let me go back, and I'm gonna go to admin, and then I'm gonna take away the capacity for Hector to be able to modify bills. So you're gonna see that same transaction I just created, because my user permission changed, I won't have access to that anymore. So I'm doing that as an example. So I'm gonna go to company, users, set up users and roles, and then you see Hector right now has full access. So we're gonna take away his full access. I'm gonna go to edit. Let me see. Let me just make sure it shows that Hector is logged in, which I shouldn't be. So let me kick Hector out for whatever reason. It still shows that Hector is logged in. So let me make sure I kick Hector out. Okay, perfect. Let me log back in as admin. Anyway, so I'm gonna go to edit, and then I'm gonna take away Hector's full access for a second. I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK, and I'm not gonna assign him any roles. So Hector's a user with no roles assigned to it. And then I'm gonna create a role specifically for Hector. So I'm gonna go to, I can grab any current role that I have. So for example, I can grab the admin role, or I can grab the full access role, whatever I want, and I can duplicate it. And then I'm gonna call this one Hector's access. Okay, and then what you do with duplicating an existing role, what I like, the reason why I like doing that is because it gives me a template. Okay, and with that template, I can start working. So the role list, what you're seeing here on the screen, is the single most important part of the user permission structure. Now this description here, I can delete completely. You can enter whatever you want in there. And I can go area by area and select what Hector has access to. So I'm gonna give Hector full access to everything, with the exception of accounts payable. So I'm gonna show you that real quick. So I'm gonna go to full access to everything. full access, and full access. So Hector currently has full access to everything. This is almost like an admin, just without being able to change user permissions. Now, I'm going to go into vendors and payables, and then under enter bills, I'm going to not give him full access. I'm going to give him partial access. I'm going to give him access to view, print, and modify. So I can't create and I can't delete. I know that's a weird sort of combination there. So I'm going to be able to view, modify, and print. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Close, and go ahead and log out, and then log back in as Hector. Hopefully we don't have the same drama when I get back out as admin. So I'm logged in as Hector, so I have basically full access with the exception of being able to delete bills. So when I click on bill, it says you need view access in order to perform that. Interesting. I thought it had given me view access. Let me go ahead and log back out. Log in as admin now. And go to company, users, set up users and roles. Okay. Oh, I didn't give myself the role, right? So I basically forgot to do that part. So I have to, even though I created a role called Hector's Access, I have to add it into the user. So obviously that was my mistake, not adding Hector's Access in there. And while I'm at it, let me go to my role list real quick and just making sure that I have the correct term. So I do have view, let me see, bills. I do have view, modify, and print. Okay, I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna take away print. Hit OK, close, and then switch back. Logged in as Hector. Put the password in there. Okay, enter bill. There you go. Now, one really important thing to know about QuickBooks, and this is just how they designed it. I don't know why they decided on this, but any screen in which you have partial access or limited access, you're gonna see sort of a gray background. And that gray background was, Intuit's programmer's way to let the user know that they have limited access to this tool. I mean, I personally would have preferred that they would have put a box there saying, hey, you only have access to this, this, and that, instead of that weird gray area. But this is what they decided on. Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and look at a bill. There we go. So I'm looking at a bill right here, and I have access to modifying it. Remember, I can't create new ones. I can modify it. So notice that that gray area became white, letting me know that I can, in fact, modify it. So I'm going to go ahead and put 1200, and then I'm going to click save. See, I was able to change it with no problem. Okay, no issues changing it. But let me go back to it. But now if I try to print it, I don't have print permissions. If I try to delete it, I don't have delete permissions. Now, curious enough, if I void it, I do have access to voiding, because modifying and voiding is the same thing. As a matter of fact, a void is just modifying something to have a $0 value. Now, when I go to save and new, then this becomes gray because it's a brand new transaction and I don't have permission to create a new bill. So look, I'm gonna go ahead and put something in here, hit save and close. I don't have permission to creating a bill. So I just kind of wanted to show you how that dynamic works. Now, sometimes it is important that you're very careful with conflicting permission structures. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let me go back into admin, and I'm going to show you what a conflicting a permission structure can be. Log back as admin. And this stuff is going to take some trial and error and some practicing. A lot of my clients want to start with giving the user almost no permissions and little by little be giving them more access. And some of them do it the other way. They start with full access and little by little take it away. I mean, it's up to you what you think it's a better way of doing it. Okay, so let me go back into company, users, set up user roles. I'm not gonna edit the user, I'm gonna edit the role. So I'm gonna go to role and go to Hector's axis and click on edit. And then let me go back into bills here. I'm gonna give full access for Hector to create bills. However, I'm gonna do something that's kind of confusing. I'm gonna go into centers and give him no access to my vendor center, okay? Which is, it's a little bit confusing, right? I'm gonna go into, and I'm gonna hit okay. So what I've done is I gave him full access to bills, but no access to the vendor centers. Let me show you what happens. So I'm gonna log back in as Hector. I know it's not fun watching somebody log out and log back in, okay? And somebody's asking, is there a separate permission structure to allow people to void? The answer is no. Voiding and modifying would be the same permission structure. So when I go to enter bill, I have access to all my vendors, no problem. So I can create a vendor, no problem. But if I go to vendor center, I don't have access to it. Now the challenge with it is, even though I have access to creating bills, but because I don't have access to vendor center, notice I cannot create new vendors. So that's an extremely important part of designing a permission structure. Maybe you do have an employee or a user that you want them to give them full access to bills. But if you don't give them access to the vendor center, they can't create new vendors. Notice what happens there. So this is what I call a conflicting permission structure. Now that could be great by design, like it is possible that this is what you want, but it's very weird that someone would be able to create bills but not be able to create new vendors. Now that doesn't make it's not completely nonsensical, because it is possible that your accounts payable person, it's only allowed to work with current vendors. So let me go back and kind of show you how that would change if you wanted to kind of narrow down what kind of permission structure you wanted to give that user in terms of creating vendors or modifying vendors. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into that particular area. Whoops. My admin doesn't have a password. So I'm going to go back into that Hector's role list. So company, user, set up roles and permissions, go back to role list and go back to Hector's axis and edit. And I'm going to go to vendor center. And then, as I mentioned earlier, because we gave him no access to vendor center, Hector cannot create new vendors. However, if I were to give him partial access where they can create new vendors, okay, so I can give them partial access to create new vendors, then at that point I can give someone the ability to be able to create a bill and create a new vendor for the bill, but they can't modify or delete existing vendors. Okay, so that's actually kind of an interesting thing. So you had to choose, can that person modify vendors? Can that person create vendors? Now, the problem with modifying, not giving them access to create new vendors, but giving them access to modifying vendors, and I'm going to show you, this is one of the big flaws that this system has, that in many ways, the reasons why you would deny someone, a user, the capacity to create new vendors is to prevent maybe some potential fraud. Like, hey, I don't want Hector to be able to create a new vendor because maybe their vendor is their cousin and they're paying them and they're stealing money from the company that way. So in theory, if you can't create new vendors, that solves that problem, right? Okay, well, check this out. I can't create a new vendor, right? I can only use an existing vendor. However, because I have modify access, I can go into my vendor, I can right click and edit, and I can change this name to whoever I want. So let's say, for example, I'm going to call it Carlos. Okay, and Carlos is, let's say, my cousin, and I want to start paying checks to him. So what ends up happening is I can now create a bill for Carlos, even though I wasn't allowed to create a new vendor. I could just modify the vendor's name. So that's one of the fundamental flaws that this system has. The other fundamental flaw, I'll show you where it is let's say, for example, I will keep the vendor's name like this, okay? This is the old vendor's name. But under print check as, I'm gonna put there Carlos, let's say Garcia, let's say it's my cousin, and I'm gonna click OK, and then I'm gonna go ahead and enter a bill for Florida DOR, right? So it looks like a regular, vendor that we already have, and once people look at this, it looks like normal. It's a vendor that we work with. It's probably something that we need to pay, probably a real expense account for the business. But then I'm gonna go ahead and pay this bill and pay it with a check. And I'm gonna show you that check right there. When you look at the check will actually print as Carlos Garcia. So that's one of the challenges that you will have with something like this, that you're gonna have a different vendor's name in the check. Now, of course, you can catch this by looking at bank statements and seeing who cashed the checks and stuff like that. But I'm just kind of showing you that that it's the permission structure is not perfect, especially when it comes to preventing fraud. But that I think it's a good example of how some people, at least some of my clients, have gamed the system. All right, let me go back into admin, and then what I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to show you what happens when you have two permission structures that override each other. So for example, right now Hector cannot create new vendors, but if I have more than one role set up for them, and in the other role, whatever the other role happens to be, in the other role, if they can in fact create bills, that's going to override and do give them access to it. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Let me go back to rules and permissions. I'm going to go to Hector's role and just double check under vendors. Let's say that Hector cannot enter bills. So I'm actually exclusively taking away Hector's capacity to enter bills. However, when I go look at the user, Hector, I'm giving him Hector's access, and I'm also going to give him accounts payable. So I'm giving them two roles that are overriding each other. And the way QuickBooks Enterprise works is the overriding is not to disallow, the overriding is to allow. So because I gave Hector more than one user role, what ends up happening is that whatever role has permissions to do something overrides the one that does not. So when I log back in as Hector, I will be able to create bills no problem, because accounts payable role has access to bills. So what I recommend doing, especially when you have users that have multiple roles in it, is to use this button here called View Permissions. So when you click on this button called View Permissions, you're gonna get a window that allows you to choose, well, what do you wanna view permissions for? You wanna do it for a role, or do you wanna do it for a user? And there's situations in which you wanna do both. Like for example, if I wanted to compare accounts payable, accounts receivable, and banking roles, and then click on display, I can compare these other roles. This has nothing to do with users, because remember, the roles are dynamic and they can be changed back and forth across users. But by doing this, it allows me to see more or less what each role has access to. So it's actually really good to have and to print, especially if you're an advisor of some sort and you want to help your client through permission structure. So this is something you can print. You can print a couple of sample roles, have them printed. You can even, if you have a PDF printed, convert it to PDF, maybe email it to your client, whatever happens to be. Let me go ahead and just create a PDF real quick so we can see what that PDF looks like. So I'm printing it as PDF. So then it's a good exercise to sit down with someone, the owner of the company, whatever happens to be, and have this printed and write notes. They're saying, hey, this is the type of role that I would ideally give to person A, or the type of role that I would ideally give to person B. So this is what the PDF looks like once you create a printout. Now down here in this legend, it tells you what V, C, what all this stuff means. So V means view, C means create, M modify, D delete, P print, and VV view balance. So some of these roles, as you go up and down with it, the ones that are not full, like this is a perfect example right here, see? So this one has V and C. So this one can view customers and create customers. But this particular role cannot delete customers or cannot modify customers. Now, some of them, that when they say mixed, typically mixed is it's a title used for the top categories, just to let you know that it's sort of mixed across the board. So you're never going to see a mixed inside of one of the specific permission structures. You're only going to see it as part of like sort of the major category in there. Now, there's about 114 of these. So you have a lot of sort of room for growth. Now, the only person that can be on this screen to view and print the permissions is admin. So I know somebody was asking, can anyone view this? And only admin. Now I'm going to show you, instead of doing it by role, doing it by user, and this would make more sense for reviewing what access each user has. But just remember that it wouldn't make any sense for you to view permissions per user if you don't have the roles already set up. So I'm going to go ahead and click on display, and then I'm going to show you. See, pretty much has full access to everything. And I'm going to go down to bills and see how he has full access to bills. The reason why Hector has full access to bills, and I'll show you, let me go back into the role list, is because Hector's access doesn't. However, accounts payable, which makes total sense, accounts payable does. So when I go into my accounts payable, notice I do have full permission for entering bills. So when I have a user that has more than one role, just keep in mind that they override each other. And they don't override each other towards the disallowing of access, they override each other towards allowing the access. So it's really, really important that you keep that in mind when using more than one role. I personally, in my opinion, I recommend creating one role per every user, allowing you to change that across the board. Because what ends up happening is, I'm going to take away this for a second, and ends up happening is, let's say we bring a new employee in. So we're going to bring Jose in. And when Jose comes in, because I'm just being lazy and I'm not taking my time, I'm going to say, you know what? Jose pretty much is going to be the same as Hector. So I'm going to go ahead and give him Hector's access and then hit OK. Well, the problem with that is that when anyone, maybe in the future, anyone wants to then change Hector's access. So for example, I'm going to go and change Hector's access and click on edit. And then I'm going to go ahead and take away, let's say, bill tracker or calendar, whatever, from the role called Hector's access. If I'm not paying attention to how many users are being affected by this, then maybe I'm not noticing that I'm changing it across the board. So I actually like creating one role per every user instead of mix and matching, unless there are cases in which I can, I know for a fact that the two users are identical. But I do strongly recommend that you have one user role for each. Now, let me create a new role, and I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes kind of walking you through every one of these activities, and I will tell you what I know about them, and if I don't know about them, I will tell you I have no clue. Okay, so let's start with accounting. So accounting tools. This is specifically having access to batch enter, client data review, batch reclassify. Asset registers has to do with any assets on the balance sheet. I'm going to tell you right here. So I'm going to go to list chart of accounts. So it has to do having access to any of these registers that are not necessarily the bank. Okay, so all these assets registers, like being able to double click into these registers and adding things to it, that's what that asset register means. Okay. Then we have edit close transactions. This means that even if the books are closed and you happen to know the password, whether or not you can do this. So it is possible that you can have a user that knows the closing date password, but does not have access to editing them. Really, really important. Equity registers, similar to what I talked about, the assets registers, being able to add transactions straight into the register. General journal, this is just a journal entry. Can this person create journal entries or partial access where they can only maybe modify them or view them or print them or whatever. Okay, manage fixed assets. This has to do with a tool called the Fixed Asset Manager. So if you give a person full access, they can use the tool. Now, this has nothing to do with being able to add or create a fixed asset account in the chart of accounts. This has to do with using a third sort of a separate tool that QuickBooks comes with QuickBooks Enterprise called the Fixed Asset Manager. Now, working trial balance is basically a function inside of the client data review that allows you to work with a working trial balance. Now, I'm going to pull it up real quick because that's kind of cool because I've never shown this before, and I know maybe some people don't use it, but I'm going to go into client data review and show you what the working trial balance is. So inside of here somewhere, there is my working trial balance. Where are you? There you go. Open working trial balance. So it's inside client data review, and it's this tool here that allows you to review beginning balance, transactions, adjustments, ending balance, and adding any work paper reference if you're making journal entries into the working trial balance. Now, it could be possibly an entirely different webinar or episode in which we dedicate to this tool by itself. I wanted to show you what that was. So that permission structure that was there was whether or not the user will have access to that tool. Okay, so that's accounting. Banking. Now, bank feeds, okay, that's whether or not you can use the bank feeds module to download transactions from the bank. Bank registers, you can specifically give a user access to one bank account and not to the other. Let me show you that real quick. So I'm going to create another bank account called, let's say, savings. Okay, so I got one checking and one savings. Let me just call this one checking. That will make things a lot easier. Okay, I know I misspelled that. Let me go to setup users, create a new role. Let's call it new. We'll keep working on that one. And then under banking, on the registers, I can say this user has full access to the checking, but the savings they can only view. Okay, so that's something that's really, really important for you to know. So if somebody wants to create a check or a deposit or anything inside of the savings account, this user will not be able to because they cannot create any transactions in the register. Now, checks, that would be the check module. So this person can have, let's say, for example, full access to checks. Being able to print checks, that's something that sometimes people want to take away. So they want maybe a user to be able to create the checks, but then someone else logs in and actually prints them. Credit card charges, self-explanatory. Can you enter credit card charges? Unfortunately, this doesn't mimic the bank registers, whereas it can specifically limit whether or not you can access one credit card or the other. That would be nice. So the only place where you can create a limit is specifically on the bank accounts. So when you give somebody access to credit card charges or credit cards, it would be all credit cards. So you cannot limit a user to being able to access just one particular credit card. Deposits, self-explanatory. Can they create deposits? Loan Manager is a tool that it's called the Loan Manager that calculates principal and interest on loans for you and suggests the transaction to be posted. So this is just whether or not you're allowed to access that tool. Reconcile, self-explanatory. Can you reconcile or no? And that's what that is. And transfer funds, which is a module that allows you to transfer amounts between balance sheet accounts. Okay, let's go into centers. Self-explanatory. We have customer center, employee center, vendor center. A lot of times people don't want to give any access to any employee information, so they take away employee center access. So we can give full access to vendors and customers, but then give them no access to employees. Maybe they can view the list and that's it. A lot of times you want them to at least be able to view the list, but not be able to edit it or go into it or look at a social security number or whatever. Company. Now, let me just go back to this for a second. If you, in the employee center, customer center, vendor center, if you give someone modify entries, it allows them to go into editing the employee or the customer or the vendor. And inside of that edit screen, there could be sensitive information. So if you don't want that user to be able to view information inside of it, you want to only give them access to creating new ones, or view only, which still doesn't allow them to go inside of a particular employee and look at any information inside of it. Okay, so bill tracker, that's a specific feature. Billing solution sign up, I have no clue what this is, so I'm just going to completely disclaim the fact that this is useful at all. I think this is something old that QuickBooks used to do that they don't do anymore. Calendar is a module called the calendar. So a lot of these you have full or none. Notice that a lot of these you have full or none. Now, company information, you can give someone the capacity to view the tax ID, view the address, view the type of company that it is, but maybe not necessarily modify it or change it. Company preferences, again, you still have to give someone, they would have to be a single user to be able to change the company preference, but you can give someone full or no access to it. Now, certain company preferences can only be changed by admin, but you could have a user that if that user is logged in, a single user, they can change some of the company preferences. Unfortunately, there isn't a simple list for that. Vehicle mileage, do you have access to tracking miles, yes or no? Find all transactions is this. Now, this is really, really important. This tool here called Find. This is a tool that if you give someone access to this, although they don't have access to payables, they can still see the transactions themselves. So you have to be very, very careful with giving someone access to the Find tool, even if you want to keep them away, let's say from paychecks. You can keep someone away from the employee center or from editing or viewing paychecks. But if they go through the Find tool and they go to, for example, transaction type, and they put here, let's say, paychecks, and they go Find, they're at least going to be able to see the paychecks. I mean, they can't go in them and see the details, but they are going to be able to see the paychecks. So remember that Find All tool is almost one of the single most important tools to potentially take access away if you want. Let me go back into where we were. Potentially take access to that if you don't want a person to be able to see things that maybe you wanted to take away from other permission structures. Okay, I'm going through the questions here. Can you create a permission structures for a front desk order takers? We memorize report list so they do not see accounting manager reports in the memorized report list. So unfortunately, your question, Lori, is that on reports, you can give it, when you give them access to the report list, memorized report list, you give them access to all the memorized reports. You can't say only certain memorized reports you can see and cannot see. So I just wanted to ask you that. So that's unfortunate. You can't pick and choose what reports from the memorized reports they have access to. Then we have the income tracker, the insights, and the homepage. Planning and budgeting. Okay, so you can set up whether or not they can have access to budgets or forecasts, printing labels, remote access. Honestly, I don't know what this is. That's not a thing from my perspective. So this is completely shooting blanks. So I would say I don't know what it is. Set up closing date and password. Okay, that's self-explanatory. Set up bank feeds. Okay, whether or not you can configure new bank feeds. Synchronize contacts. I think I don't know what it is, but I think it has to do with synchronizing contacts with Microsoft Outlook, but I don't know. I've never used that. Company and receivables. We have whether or not you have access to looking inside of the AR accounts. Assessing finance charges. We talked about that like a month ago on the last webinar, that particular function. Billable time and cost. We talked about that about 2 months ago. Changing item prices. Now, this is a very common question I get. A lot of people set up users and they take away the capacity to change the item price. But when they go on invoice, they can put whatever price they want on an invoice. This permission structure only limits the user from using a tool called change item prices in batch. So denying someone change item prices from here does not disallow them from changing an item price on an invoice itself. So that's something really, really important for you to keep in mind. This only disallows people from using, I believe it's this tool right here, change item prices. So this tool here called change item prices, and I did a pretty extensive webinar on that like a year ago, so you can search it in YouTube. This tool is what that user permission is. So a lot of people look at that and they go, great, this solves my problem of salespeople selling the product at whatever price they want. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. Okay, credit card refunds, credit memos, like all this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Override credit limit, that means whether or not the person it's allowed to create an invoice even after there's outstanding balances that hit that credit limit. So you may want to think about whether or not you want someone to have access to that. Receive payments, sales orders, sales receipts, statement charges, all this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Statements, if someone has access to customers and invoices, I wouldn't take away statement access. Undeposited funds account, right? Whether you can receive a payment against undeposited funds. If you want to give someone access to receiving payments, you should always give them full access to undeposited funds account too. So these two should go hand in hand. Use credit card numbers and view credit card numbers. That I'm not sure what it means, but I think it has to do with this. So I'm going to show you real quick. Is when you go into a customer itself and you put in credit card information in this box. So I believe that's what that means. Otherwise, I really don't know what that user permission is. I haven't run into a situation where I have to know what that one means. Typically, I just either put yes or no, and it doesn't have a lot of impact on the stuff that I do day to day. Okay, so that's that. Let's see. Employees and payroll, self-explanatory, right? Can someone create paychecks? Can they make payroll tax? Can they work with payroll tax forms? Can they pay liabilities? All that sort of thing. File, this is important. You want that person to be able to do a rebuild or do a import IAF files. You do have to be in single user mode to import IAF files a lot of times, but you can give someone import access. That means that user can log in and import IAF files, for example, backup, all that stuff in there. Clean up company data, that has to do with doing a condense. Okay, let me see what else is worth mentioning here. Lists. Okay, this is super important. Do you want someone to have access to creating new accounts? So you want to give someone that you don't really trust to create new accounts, just give him the access to viewing the list or viewing the balance, but not to create new accounts. So that's actually really neat to be able to limit someone from creating new accounts. Same deal with items, right? If you don't want someone to have the capacity to create or modify items, you do have the ability to do that. With reports, you can pick from the predetermined reports which reports they can view, print, right? So some reports they can view and print, and some they can have full access to. But as I mentioned earlier, memorized reports, they can either see all or see none. Like, it won't stop them from being able to view a report that has sensitive information if you do give them access to memorize reports. So most people that have limited access to the books, you shouldn't give them that anyway. Time tracking, same thing, right? You want them to be able to enter timesheets. Timer import and export, that's a tool that's not used very much, so I wouldn't pay much attention to that. But then the ability to do weekly timesheets. And then we have vendors and payables. Same thing, right? You want them to be able. Now, for some reason, they included inventory adjustments as part of vendors. So if you want somebody to have the capacity to adjust inventory, that's in here. Somebody to be able to build assemblies, that's in here. Receiving items, entering bills, paying bills, printing 1099s, all that stuff is in here. All right, that's as much as I wanted to cover. This could have gone really, really long, but fortunately we were able to salvage from that issue we had earlier. Let me run a quick polling question before we wrap it up. And I'm going to go through the questions to see what other questions are in here. Can a user save their own custom reports if they don't have access to the memorized report list? The answer is no. If they don't have access to memorized report lists, they cannot save or use their own custom reports. Okay. Let's see what else we have. Somebody saying billing solution was something that was discontinued a couple of years ago. Yeah, that's pretty much what I thought, but I wasn't sure what the specific right answer was. Let me go see. No, that's it. Ask your questions now, please, so I can answer them, because we're about to get wrapped up. I want to make an announcement about the next upcoming webinars, because we are going to take a break in June. So I want to tell you when the next QuickBooks Enterprise webinar is. Let me go ahead. Please answer the polling question, if you don't mind. All right, perfect. Got about 73% of the votes. That's good enough for me. All right, so we have no episodes coming in June. I'm taking a break in June. It's because I'm going to Orlando. I'm going to go to a conference called Scaling New Heights. And June's going to be kind of hectic for me, so I'm not running an Enterprise Expert webinar in June. But we're going to come back on July with an episode called Why Upgrade to QuickBooks Enterprise. So we're going to kind of deep dive into some enterprise-only features. Obviously, with the user permissions, we're not going to go as deep as we did today. So that's something that we're going to go into. So I'm going to basically highlight why you should move your clients, if you're a consultant, move your clients or upgrade yourself to QuickBooks Enterprise. And I'm going to go kind of detail by detail all the core functions that QuickBooks Enterprise has. So if you are attending this live, you will get a reminder to attend this on July 19th. Otherwise, if you're watching this recording later on in YouTube, go to enterprise.expert to register for the webinar. Now, some upcoming webinars. Today at 4 p.m. I have a Small Business Power Hour webinar, and we're going to do an in-depth social media channel platform comparison for marketing. So I'm going to give you some of my experience that I've had using social media platforms for marketing. Whether you're an accountant or anything else, really, any services you provide, you may want to do that. Tomorrow, QB Power Hour at 12 p.m. Eastern, Michelle Long's doing a presentation on advising clients on solvency, liquidity, and cash flow. So if you're an accountant or a business consultant, you really may want to hear this one. And if you happen to be a QuickBooks Pro advisor, which we do have quite a few here that are attending, that's as an ACE class, so you get advanced continuing education. Now on July 5th, we're coming back with Tax Power Hour, and we're going to do a deep dive analysis on shareholder distribution, corporate dividends, partner guarantee payments, and compensation of officers from a perspective of tax. And then on the same July 5th at 2 p.m., we're going to be doing a deep dive and a pivot table on Excel. So there's a lot of stuff coming up. So this month we have, again, today 4 p.m. Join me, and tomorrow at 12 p.m. join me and Michelle Long for that webinar. And then June we'll take a break. There will be no webinars in June, and then we're coming back in July with a bang. All the webinars that I'm involved with, there's the website hectorgarcia.com/webinars. You can just go into that website and sign up for any webinars that you're not currently already signed up.